I just wanted to start out, acknowledging how strange, how big of a year it's been for everyone, and give you maybe an opportunity to start out talking about just what's been a really big surprise, what's worked out really well, how it's been to be a brand marketer during these times.
It's been interesting because I think in some ways we learned some completely new lessons, and then in other ways we learned maybe some lessons we thought that we could push aside for some of those new lessons were in fact ready to be relearned. I think there's some things that are happening in terms of kind of an approach to older tactics. Sorry, she's very unhappy today. An approach to maybe some more traditional means of engagement and driving performance for brands that seem to make more sense now in a new post-pandemic environment where we might have been moving away from them prior to the pandemic in some respects.
Yeah, and I've been listening to a lot of brand marketers over the week, and I've actually moderated a couple of sessions, and I'm sort of curious. I think of Monster as a product I grab on a road trip, a product that I grab out at the club. It's very much sort of out in the world, and almost every other brand that I've listened to has talked about their e-commerce and their e-platform. How did you guys change or adapt to a change in your demand chain or retail presence over COVID?
I mean, one of the first things we did was we just started doubling down on retail media as a new form of brand media and trying to drive performance from that. Hold on one sec. Let me get her situated. She's just a little unhappy.
It is all right.
The other piece to this was just trying to rethink our portfolio and the funnel. Sorry, she's really struggling today. Hey,
what?
Hey, everybody wants to hear what we have to say, but not really in that respect. Can you change your tone of voice?
When I've had a late night, I'm just as loud, so it's fine.
Yeah, so she's very vocal about what we're doing here. So I think retail media just became a key constituency for us to sort of try and figure out how to focus on. And the problem for us was we didn't really have a model. So we were sort of trying to figure out a model as we were building it. And then you compound that with the fact that we are not a first party retailer. So we don't have stores. We don't have places that we can go and sort of leverage vertically to say, all right, from top to bottom funnel, here's how we're going to do this. We have to work with our distributors through the Coca-Cola bottler network. We have to work with the retailers, 7-Eleven, Target, Kroger network, right? And there's not, I wouldn't say there's a misalignment, but everybody's got their own particular sets of objectives, right? And the objectives specifically for Monster or our portfolio brands relative to a Kroger network or a Walmart aren't always going to line up completely simpatico. And so that's where we run into some situations where we have to try and adjust on the fly or improvise in terms of how we're going to execute.
Yeah, and not only that for the retail side, but I mean, you guys are famous for sponsoring so many great extreme sports, whether it's BMX, motocross, skateboarding. What did you do with those budgets? How did you support the teams, the athletes, the musicians that you normally support, and sort of pivot over this last year?
Well, when at the height of the pandemic, we tried to focus on finding our voice relative to what everybody was going through. And, part of the struggle there was, what's authentic to Monster? And you and I talked about this a little bit the other day of, we could have, oops, sorry, she's jumping on a chair. We could have gone, she's a very adventurous young lady. We could have gone the route of saying kumbaya, right? We could have gone the route of, all right, let's all hold hands and heal the world. And that's just not a very Monster thing to do. So from our perspective, it was more about how do we provide people a sense of levity? How do we give them a boost? That's what we can do with our products. That's what we can do in terms of supporting our athletes and showing that they're going through the same thing regular folks are going through. And that's where we ended up, right? And that's how we ended up with a program like Crush Quarantine, which was really meant to sort of provide that boost.
What What's the young lady's name? We should give
This
her a
is
moment.
Hannah. It's nap time, so she's
Mm,
just very ready for her nap and trying to let me know that. But you know, it was definitely something that I think for a lot of brands we had to focus on trying to pivot. Um, but in the end, the pivot was not necessarily what we thought it was going to be. It was actually more leaning into what we really are, what our ethos of Monster really is.
yeah, I mean that makes sense. We talked about, you were doing a lot of cases to first responders, to firefighters, but didn't really become part of your brand messaging or trying to echo that out. Just sort of like doing the work without, um, trying to high five yourself around it.
Yeah, I mean that comes from our co-founders. They're a sort of don't talk about it, be about it sort of thing. And if you go back in the history of Monster, the key component of everything they've done is kind of build from grassroots up. So they didn't come in and sponsor the Supercross circuit from the top down, saying we're going to be the official beverage. They came in and said we're going to sponsor the racers, and then we're going to sponsor teams that have multiple racers, and then we're going to work our way up to being seen as being integral to the experience of going to a Supercross, a motocross race. And now it makes sense for us to be an official sponsor with Feld Entertainment, who runs the Supercross circuit in the US or MotoGP globally. And so we took that approach and tried to apply it to things going on during the pandemic. So yeah, we wanted to give products to first responders. Again, we have products that can help people get a boost when they need it for a 12-hour shift in a hospital, or riding an ambulance, driving an ambulance for that many hours, and seeing what they're seeing and needing to sort of like kind of give themselves that energy lift to go through what was probably around the next corner and probably not so great, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't about like, hey, look what we're doing. It was just, let's go do it. And those people will appreciate that we're doing it, and that's enough. That's going to move the needle for us the ways we want to. From a branding standpoint, it was more about, like, again, everybody's so fatigued by this stuff. Us adding to that in terms of talking about how scary and stressful this time period is probably isn't going to really help. And then trying to mix that with the kumbaya message, people will just call BS on us. So we said,
Mm,
let's give people a moment of levity. Let's try to find ways to use what we're kind of known for, and in some cases what we're stereotyped for. But maybe sort of own the joke a little bit, or own the punchline a little bit, and say like, yeah, we all could use a moment of zen, or a moment of kind of just like having fun still, basically. And so when you saw our campaign and you saw Pat Casey, who's one of our BMX riders, doing wheelies in his living room, and we're like, this is how you crush quarantine. The message there was, yeah, we get it. You're trying to figure out how to deal with this just like he is. And so here you go. Here's what he's doing. He's improvising just like you're doing in your life.
yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's a really good way to react. And, almost every brand I've heard talk across these 4 days has talked about authenticity and how they applied that. And I think you guys did a really amazing job with that. Now, as you know, we're a video gaming company. We put billboards in video games, rather it's virtual out of home or digital out of world. Haven't necessarily landed on how to talk about and play. Um, Monster has been, led the way in a couple of different ways. I mean, you had product placement in Death Stranding, hard coded in as the main character was drinking Monster. You're going to be sponsoring a couple of games this year. Could you tell us a little bit about your video game strategy and how you view sort of that demographic or those demographics on the whole?
Oh, sorry. I was on mute there. Philosophically, it's really no different than what we talked about with sports, right? Go from the grassroots up. And so what that means is we focus on finding ways to reach the aspirational gamer. So looking to find influencers, streamers that they pay attention to, looking to find esports orgs that they rally around, that have personalities that they grab onto. And then, as you mentioned, the IP partnerships and trying to be a part of games that are a part of the zeitgeist at a particular moment in time. And so, part of that is also trying to figure out then how to execute authentically on that. And to your point, a lot of times I think brands will knee jerk to, well, can I get my product in the game, or can I get my logo in the game? And the Death Stranding example that you pointed out, that actually came from Konami. That came from them saying, "Hey, we're just big fans, and we actually think from a storyline perspective, this is what we want to do in the game. This is post-apocalyptic world." So it's not crazy to say that you would find something like a Monster Energy can as a relic in that world, so to speak. And we said, "Okay, great, right?" Now I think going the other way, if we had tried to push for that, there's lots of games where we know like they're just going to say it's breaking the fourth wall with the audience if we inject you guys that way. It's not going to make a lot of sense. So instead, what we try to say is, okay, what is it in your game that gamers care about, and how do we imbue those elements with something that's a monster signal or a monster Easter egg, right? And so we're going to be doing a lot of that with our partnership with EA on Apex Legends. It's if you played that game, if you know that game, it's definitely sort of a fantasy oriented game. It's not a real world grounded game. So us trying to get monster cans, or even the logo, quite frankly, or the name trademark into the game would be really commercial and silly. Instead, it's more about like what matters to the people who play Apex. What are the things they grab onto from a story standpoint, from a gameplay standpoint, and then how can we do things, like creating the pivotal moment in an esports match being the beast mode moment, right? So it's really sort of tacking into something that now they're like, oh, I get why Monster is doing this. I get what they're trying to do, which is, continue to support the game and the people who love it and play it, versus like, hey, look at us, now we've got a badge somewhere in the game for all of eternity.
Yeah, and I think that's a good strategy. And when you're looking at being around gaming content rather than necessarily trying to cram a brand directly into the game, what are the platforms you're thinking of? I feel like there have been a lot of from Twitch, YouTube gaming, YouTube replay of Twitch content. Like, how do you think of a platform strategy across all of that?
We definitely try to take a fewer, bigger, better approach to this. We operate very much like a challenger brand. We are not going to come in and, like I said, just come in over the top and say, here's a pile of money, and now let's put our logo everywhere and call it a day. Instead, we're going to come from that grassroots level and say, all right, what matters to the community? How do we get ourselves in there? What resources can we stretch to sort of like plant seeds at that level that can grow, over time to provide the impact we're looking for. And so with platform strategy, it's the same thing. It's fewer, bigger, better. It's focusing where we think we can make the most impact to start, which would be a place like Twitch, for example, and then looking to see like, all right, that's an obvious play, and we feel like we're making inroads there. We just ran a live stream with Tony Hawk, Nigel Houston, Lizzie Armanto, and TP, right? So a combination of skaters and gamers coming together to play Tony Hawk Pro Skate. Really successful from our standpoint as a first step into the space. And so now it's like, okay, let's do another. And once we get that sort of rolling downhill, it's like, okay, where else are gamers spending time and energy? Because they're not all just on Twitch, to your point. Some are playing mobile games, some are using YouTube. A lot of them are playing and watching on Twitch, talking on Twitter, talking on Discord, and so we're trying to look at all of these platforms within an ecosystem, a media ecosystem, to say like, what's the right approach for us, based on where gamers are and what they do there. And we may actually have some that we say that doesn't make sense for us. We've done that in the past where there are platforms or trends within the media ecosystem, and we just say that's not right for us at all, or just not right now, based on where we're at and what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to look to think about a brand, or your brands, and what's right for them. A lot of the brand marketers I talk a lot about brand safety, brand suitability, being at a brand that's a little bit more forward, a little bit edgier. How do you think about those spaces? And is there like a master suitability document for Monster, or is it more a feeling and sort of culture?
It's feeling and culture for sure. I mean, I think we are trying to put that on paper more, just because the more things kind of live in a brain, and you add more brains to the company, then the perception of that thing becomes, I don't want to say distorted, but you have different variations of it, right? And it becomes harder to hold to a true north on, what it is. So we've definitely worked on getting that down, but I think it's one of the things that I also appreciate about Monster is that you spend enough time and immerse yourself in it, and you really kind of get a sense of what is Monster and what is not. And if you look at us versus some of our competitors, you can see some clear lines of division. the red line, if you will, of like where we won't go. And not because of out of we think that someone's better than us, or maybe we feel like we don't have the resources. It's more just straight up like we just don't think it makes sense for us. And that's coming all the way down from our co-founders, who will say things like, just because everybody else is zigging doesn't mean I don't want, or that I want to. I'd rather zag over here, and I have, I might have data that supports that. I might also just have an instinct that says this is the way to go. And when you look at the performance of the company, when you look at the stock price, going back in time, it's hard to argue with that. So some of it, I would say, it's a balance of science and art. We're trying to infuse more science into the process without being at the detriment of the art of, what the brand was built on, and sort of that feeling and instinct.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with the world reopening, is there anything, and I should say that with the caveat, I know a lot of people are suffering in a lot of parts of the world, even here in the US, but with events coming back, are there things that y'all have on the calendar? Are you waiting and seeing, or how are you positioning yourself for that?
We are doing what I think a lot of companies are doing, which is scenario planning, right? We are saying, okay, if things continue on this trajectory they're on, and we lean on the leadership in these areas, when do we think events are coming back? When do we think the sports sponsorships are coming back in sort of a full capacity? When do we think music events are going to be, going forward the way they were pre-pandemic? And then let's plan against that. But then at the same time, okay, let's also now assume that doesn't happen. And what's our answer for if that comes to pass? So we're trying to sort of A and B it. And, I think we all would like to have the return speed up, if you will, happen. But who knows? I mean, I can remember sitting in meetings in March when we were all sent home from the office and going through this, and everybody saying things like, probably by the summer. And if you'd asked me, I would have said my birthday's in late August. I would have said, oh, by the time my birthday rolls around, even in May or June, I would have said, oh yeah, no, we'll be fine. We'll be, So to be sitting here now a year later and we're still not, I think, fully sort of out of the woods. Everybody's sort of given up on trying to say, oh, that's for sure what's going to happen. And it's more about saying like, okay, what's likely to happen, but then let's do the worst case, like, orange threat level of like, assume that the exact opposite of that happens. What are we going to do then?
Yeah. Now you said yourself that you operate as a challenger brand. You like to come in at a base level. You have a whole portfolio of brands, and they're around the world. How do you stay close to different subcultures and encourage your teams from a company culture perspective to know what's going on and to take risks in their market?
It really comes down to empowering those people, right, who are at that level to bring things forward or bring things up in the organization for other managers and leaders to look at and respond to, and then support decisions that get made on the way back down. So from a global digital standpoint, we rely on the teams in those key regions and markets to really drive the execution. I think it would be silly and self-serving for me to say, sitting in Orange County, California, that I'm going to know exactly how to drive marketing in, and I'll use the most obvious example, China, for example, right? Like that's going to be a real challenge, right? I don't have the background. I have high level digital experience, but my experience in China is somewhat limited. And furthermore, I'm not really well versed in the culture for obvious reasons. So, why would I tell them how to execute? So we kind of look at it as a hub and spoke model. My team's job is really meant to sort of set a philosophy to try and instill some guidelines and guardrails and sort of, fundamental principles of how to approach that strategy, and then allow other teams across the globe or in other functions of marketing, right? A brand management team, a field marketing team, a customer marketing team who's dealing with their retailers, then they can understand that and then sort of help us adopt it in that area the right way, right? And I think that's where, one of the things that we try to be careful of is, we are a support structure at Monster, the digital team. We're not the drivers of what's happening, right? Our job is to take what the business and the brand management teams tell us is a priority, and then figure out how we're going to support that priority from a digital perspective. And by extension, then, we need to rely on the subject matter experts in those other functions. If we're saying, hey, we want to do something in digital that's going to drive performance with a retailer, then all right, I want that retailer team sitting at the table telling us what matters to that retailer, telling us, what their presence looks like from a digital perspective, what their priorities are, versus us just saying, well, we're in charge of this, so to speak, so we're going to tell you what we want to do.
So in my last role at Google, one of the major pivots of the last few years has been really focused on co-op marketing and enabling co-op marketing. Do you do that a lot? Share budgets with your retailers, share advertising with your retailers, or is it really more planning session but separate execution?
Planning session and separate execution right now, but I think everybody's seeing the benefit of co-op. And I think that's going to be something you're going to find, especially as the retail dynamics change. I think the previous conversation I overheard, the woman from Sperry, forgive me, I forget her name, she was talking about like there's still a physical presence matters and that retail stores matter. And I agree. I think the idea that we are moving to a completely digitized version of living is probably a little overblown. The question then is, what's that retail presence? What value does it serve, right? What's its function? And then what's the scope of it? And so if you're a retailer, then you're looking at that and saying like, okay, well, how am I going to drive, equal to greater return in a changing and possibly shrinking sort of environment? And that's where they're probably going to look to partners like us to say, hey, how can we work together to drive performance that's a win-win?
And as we see that, I definitely agree with you. I don't think the physical retail world is going away, and I feel like even the biggest names in digital have started getting physical presences. Rather, it's Warby Parker opening stores, or Amazon buying Whole Foods and their new checkouts. How has sort of e-grocery, Amazon, Instacart, and their explosion onto a scene affected the way that you view retail in your own channel?
It's had a tremendous effect. I mean, the growth in our category and for us as a business in those areas has been, exponential in the last few years. And that's great. At the same time, it's almost like a teenager who's kind of outgrowing themselves through puberty, where you have like the achy body, you have the voice changing and all these things happening to you where you're just like, wait, what is going on here? And you almost quite can't catch up. And I feel like that's where we're at right now, is we're starting to catch up. We're starting to prioritize this a bit relative to maybe what we had done previously, and getting to the level where it's like we're actually capitalizing on all the demand that's out there instead of trying to catch up, almost the drinking from a fire hose analogy. We've been able to turn the faucet back a little bit to a more manageable level, but it continues to increase as a priority. And the interesting thing in my area is this intersection and blurring or dissolving of the line between what is considered e-commerce, whether it's platform or tactics, and then media. And you look at something like Amazon and you can see it clearly, but now Walmart's following suit, Kroger's following suit, right? They all have media offerings, media networks, media capabilities. If you go into other industries, telco like Verizon has a Verizon media arm, right? Which we work with and discuss projects with sometimes in terms of, finding their audience and reaching them on Verizon devices or through Verizon platforms. So this retail landscape is quickly turning into just sort of like the new form of digital landscape. And these walled gardens are increasingly important, I think, for many retailers, as far as where you can go not only to get targeting, but also scale, right? There's just a tremendous amount of scale with someone like Walmart or Amazon, and the funnel has been collapsed in that area, right? When you're working with that partner. So that's really interesting. If you start thinking about, I get all this scale and I get it much closer to the point of sale. an audience that's probably already been primed to some degree because they're there, right? They're at what was considered typically an e-commerce destination versus often the social universe, and I might have to pull them, along a few steps, a few interactions, a few different storytelling bits to get them to then say, okay, now I'm ready to think about making a purchase.
So that really gives you scale and bottom of the funnel as a digital marketer. When you think about those two things together, do you think it vastly changes your creative, your brand message in that space, or do you think the same brand message still resonates?
No, I yes and no. You can't walk away from what your brand is. So in Monster's case, we are never going to walk away from the idea of, Monster will help you unleash the beast inside of you. We might find ways to say that to different audiences in different ways, but that's still going to be there, sort of the subtext, if you will. What needs to change is, in my opinion, the sort of visual cues and the sort of the message cues that I guess you could say more broadly sort of spur the outcome you want, right? Because if I'm out at the top of the funnel at a place like, let's just say YouTube, the cues I'm trying to give somebody are probably things to have them watch whatever it is I want them to watch, first and foremost. And then past that, it might be, to go seek out more content, or it might be to go to a website, or it might be to perhaps look into buying a product, right? But that's a different message versus when you're, say, in the Walmart media network, or you're on the Walmart website and you're trying to deliver a message to get somebody to click add to cart. Or even if you're using social technology, we partner with Micmac for this, to get the sort of swipe and shop from Instagram stories or Snapchat stories, right? Again, where my ordinary Instagram stories might overbalance to motocross, skate, MMA, gaming, lifestyle oriented content. If I have a new product rolling out, I want that product to be big and bold. I want that to be the thing that sort of triggers the swipe to add to cart. So I do think you have to kind of think it through. It's like, what's the overall message I'm trying to communicate? And then, as you get down the funnel, or if you have something that's maybe more product oriented, demand oriented, you say, I want to achieve that result, but I want to be consistent with what I'm doing over here, brand lifestyle wise. And you have to create that red thread, right? Okay, well then how does this product help somebody unleash the beast in whatever way that it does? And how am I going to show that? How am I going to tell them that? And how do I fit that into the formats, right, based on what they're going to be doing, that make the most sense? And I think it's harder than it sounds, right? I mean, you and I are talking and it sounds like, well, yes, of course, check, check, check. Why would I not do all those things? It's like, well, okay, but now go back to your organization and have that conversation with a brand team, a creative team, a media team, right? A commercial team. And everybody, again, back to your question about like, is it on paper? Is it in our heads? Well, everybody's going to have in their head a different variation of like how you get that done, right? And that's where one of the toughest jobs I have and my team has is trying to figure out how we sort of thread from all those constituencies that we're a support to and kind of get something that we can put together and go, okay, this is the best solution, even if it's not perfect, right? And in a funny way, it's like agency work, right? The brief matters, the inputs, like what are we trying to do? Who are we trying to do it with? Where are we trying to do it? When are we trying to do? Like those are all the things that if you're missing some of that info, that context, then it's really hard to contextualize what you're going to do coming out of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with it relatively easy to say and very hard to do, are there brands that you really admire, that you think are doing an excellent job of this, that you want to emulate out there?
I think the brands that I find most interesting are the ones, like I said, where I see a kinship with Monster in the sense that they don't really ever walk away from who they are. They might, tweak things here and there on the surface or around the margins, but the crux of the message is the same. So an obvious one is Patagonia, and you might on the surface be like Patagonia and Monster. That's like those are two on the opposite poles of like what they stand for. It's like, yes, that's true in a lot of ways, overtly from a marketing standpoint. but Patagonia, think about everything that's been going on, and think about, the socio-political environment. I don't want to even go into that because that's a lightning rod, but they have clearly staked out a position, and they never waver on it, no matter what. And in a similar respect to what we talked about before with Monster supplying products, all across the country and the world to healthcare and first responder workers, Patagonia is living, sort of the talk every day. And they don't talk about it maybe as often as other brands who are out there chattering away about whatever trending topic is happening at any given time. And I have a healthy level of respect for any marketing team that can say no, which I'm imagining they do quite a bit, right? Who can say, nope, not for us. Nope, not going to do that. Cool idea, it doesn't make sense for us, right? Like, as I think sometimes marketers, we get frustrated when we're told no, or something doesn't happen for whatever reason. And the reality is we should probably be saying no to ourselves more often. We should probably be doing more of the hard work up front to be like, does this really make sense? Let me try and tear this apart. And if I can tear it apart pretty easily, then I need to go back to the drawing board. So I admire brands like Patagonia. Vans is another one that I think does a pretty good job of, they have to walk that line a little bit more than maybe a Patagonia does, of being in the zeitgeist, but also still sort of remaining inherently Vans. And I think they do a really good job of that as well. So those are two off the top of my head that I think do a great job of following a philosophy that seems to be very sort of important to us here at Monster, and that can pay dividends for the brands who can execute it well and stick to it.
Cool. I have a question in the Q&A. I know we only have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, let's do it.
We don't want to ignore our attendees. Do you prefer more formalized esports that function primarily as a league, like Overwatch or Valorant's VCT? Are there benefits to pursuing marketing strategies for more sporadic event-based esports like Super Smash Brothers tournaments or the like? So are you looking at leagues or events, and how do you think about the two?
It's a great question, and it's a tough answer because, if I read that question again, there are benefits to pursuing either path. One of the fun parts of the job is, in sort of akin to saying no, is when you're developing a strategy, you're inherently making choices and trade-offs, right? You're saying, if I'm going to go do this, then I'm not going to do that. Or if I do this, then that's going to mean X, or that means Y is not happening. And so in this case, the question comes down to, what's your objective, right? And so for Monster, we do tend to focus more on the league and the formal esports approach for a couple of reasons. One is scale. We are I would say, not new to gaming, but gaming is new. It's new for Monster to be a priority. And so being able to get to scale quicker in terms of the reach, the impact we can demonstrate that it can have for us, is important because it validates continued investment in the space. The other piece is just the trend analysis that our gaming team does, where we see that most everything is kind of moving to the leagues. Everything's being sort of formalized and organized. And you can think about this like any sport, where it's kind of the Wild West in the beginning, and then it comes in and becomes the NFL or the NBA, and then the ABA comes along and they merge, and they just keep sort of building to this sort of singular entity, right? Esports is a bit different because the games could all be considered their own sports leagues in essence. But what you see is this sort of coalescing from the publisher level, the developer level, to try and get to, okay, here's our league, here's our established league framework globally, and that's for the same reason the other ones do. And I do not say this to be crass. It's monetization, right? It's easier to monetize something that's put together like that, versus trying to peg the individual worth of an individual event, which has all these other contextual factors, like where the event is held, what the penetration of the gameplay in the market or that area is, right? There's all these other things in the one-offs that you kind of have to consider, and they're hard. It doesn't mean we don't do it. We have done things like that for the right, sort of intersection or confluence of factors. But on the whole, we tend to go the more formal route, for those two reasons. And then also, just it makes it easier working with the publisher. There's a lot more value you can extract from a partnership because you're working with the publisher all the way through, right? They care about esports. They want that sponsored, funded, because that drives growth of visibility of the game, which drives the in-game monetization, which drives their bottom line. And then we're coming at it the other way. We're like, okay, well, the esports stuff, we already have teams. That's great. We're already there. But what else we can do with you is awesome. But hey, listen, if that's the doorway for us to get into talking about gameplay storytelling and integrations there, or cool ideas we have for, co-branded or collaborative storytelling on that side of things in the IP, that's where we want to be. And so invariably, it's a little bit easier to kind of meet there versus with the one-off events where it's really just about the event, right? It's hard to sort of say, hey, give me some more access to new and custom IP opportunities for this one event.
Yeah, and like that's interesting. I mean, when you think about reach, looking at they mentioned Overwatch, looking at Blizzard Activision with over 100 million professional players in the world. But how do you look at the other side of gaming? The casual, hyper casual, mobile gaming. 2 minutes while standing in line, 5 minutes at the grocery store side of things. That is almost the opposite, right? Disparate, hundreds of different games, thousands of different titles on different developers. Do you guys play in that reach as well, or look at that?
We look at it. We don't go as deep in integrations and partnerships there, and that's mostly because it's new. And so what we usually start with is, how do you sort of, inject yourself in and sort of see what happens, right, when you do that. So maybe more from a media standpoint, we would get into in-app advertising content that's sort of delivered during these mobile games when people are doing the sort of free to play with the in-app purchase to get to the no ad space, right? And try to understand like, hey, that performance, earning that attention to drive, positive outcomes, how's that stack up with CTV? Or how's that stack up with targeting sports or some of these other areas, right? And if you can point to an over-index, then you can start to say, oh, okay, you know what? If mobile gaming is over-indexing in terms of earning positive attention for us or driving measurable outcomes, if we could even get to that, hey, we should start probably thinking about a deeper or a broader investment beyond just media. We should start thinking about partnerships. We should start thinking about, getting into the content collaboration space in that respect. So we're looking at it and we're dabbling in it, but it's not necessarily core yet, though I agree with you in the sense like that's where, if you can get to there and have it make sense for your brand in gaming, that's where the bulk of the consumer reach is in that sort of outer rung of casual gaming.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we couldn't agree with you more at Admix, but I see Emily's joined us, so I really want to thank you for taking a little bit of time in the middle of all three of our nap times at the end of a long week of Cannes. It's been
She's
really
thankfully
great chatting
sleeping
with
now.
you.
Yeah,
meeting you.
likewise, Michael. I appreciate it. Thank you. Sorry for the noise disruption earlier. It was unable to be sort of accommodated.
I was going to say thank you both so much for your professionalism and empowering through. That's the life of work from home, and we appreciate you still staying on the stage, and hope your daughter's getting some much needed and deserved sleep right now.
Me too. Me too.
Well, thank you both so much for closing out our program today and the week of Cannes, and we so appreciate your time and your insights on our stage today.
Absolutely, our pleasure. Have a good one.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much to everyone who tuned in at home and all of our incredible speakers over the course of this week. We were so excited to celebrate this week of Cannes programming virtually with you all, and we hope to have you join us again for our next live cast program, which will be next week on Tuesday, June 29th for Women in Retail Marketing, starting at noon Eastern Time. We'll be joined by an array of fabulous marketing leaders from 1-800-Flowers, Sam's Club, Henkel, and many more. So we hope to have you all back and have a great rest of your week.